Okay, so we have Devra Gartenstein with us today, who has owned and run small food businesses for over 30 years. She currently coaches food and farm business founders through Business Impact Northwest. So, without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and I'll turn it over to you, Devra.
Okay, and I'll get my presentation up here. Bear with me just a moment. Hey, welcome to Food Biz Basics. So this class is an overview of the many things you need to think about when you're starting a food business. Now, I wish I could tell you that all you need to do is follow these steps and your business will be up and running. But the truth is that this is hard and there are many obstacles. The obstacles are mostly regulatory and they're also financial. And it's all connected because complying with regulations is so expensive. And I'm not saying any of this to discourage anyone. I'm saying it basically to prepare you. And I'm a coach with Business Impacts Food and Farm Business Services. I have over 30 years experience owning and running small food businesses, and I've made just about every mistake you can imagine. So I'm speaking from experience, and I can help you to avoid making some of these mistakes. And I also, the work I do, help people dig deeper and, you know, just figuring out how to make a business viable. So these are the topics that we're going to cover, and we could dedicate an entire class to any one of them. But today I'm just going to give a taste, and you can get an idea of where you want to focus going forward. Whatever food business you start, you need some kind of licensed commercial kitchen. Your kitchen options will depend on what you're making, how much of it you're making. A cottage kitchen can be a great way to get started if the health department sees your products as relatively low risk and if you're willing to start small. A shared commissary saves the huge expense of building out a kitchen, though the ongoing cost may be just as expensive as paying rent on your own space. And building your own kitchen can be expensive, but it gives you room to grow. If you build a kitchen, you may even be able to cover part of your rent by renting it out to other people if the landlord is open to it and if you can spare the kitchen time. So a cottage kitchen is a commercial kitchen that you license in your own home. It usually is the same as your home kitchen, only it must be compliant with cottage kitchen regulations. For example, you need to store ingredients for business production away from ingredients for personal use. And you need to have a strategy for keeping small children and pets out of the kitchen space while you're doing business production. If you want to license your home kitchen as a cottage kitchen, you need to submit a permit application to your state's Department. An inspector will schedule an initial inspection, and you'll be inspected annually after that. The inspections are always scheduled. The health department doesn't just show up at your house unannounced. Now, you're only allowed to make a limited range of products in a cottage kitchen. In a nutshell, you can make almost anything that can be stored at room temperature, with the exception of acidified foods like pickles or anything that uses meat like canned salmon or beef jerky. Cookies or crackers are allowable in cottage kitchens. Some of their ingredients, like eggs, milk, and butter, may need to be refrigerated before you mix them and bake them, but if you can hold the finished product at room temperature, you're good to go. If you bake a cake that can hold at room temperature, then you can prepare it in a cottage kitchen. But if you put a cream cheese frosting on it and it needs to be kept refrigerated, then you can't use a cottage kitchen. You can make jellies or jams in a cottage kitchen, but you have to follow a specific recipe as far as the ratio of sugar to fruit, although the type of fruit and the way you flavor it can vary. The other downside to working out of a cottage kitchen is limited capacity. First of all, you're working in a home kitchen, so you'll naturally be unable to spread out and work with the kind of efficiency you could achieve at a kitchen that's set up for commercial use. There's also a cap on how much you can make and sell if you're working out of a cottage kitchen. In Washington State, that number is $35,000 a year as of 2024, actually as of 2025, and it's up for $25,000 per year a few years ago. And keep in mind that if you're selling $35,000 worth of product, your bottom line income will most likely be nowhere near that once you subtract out ingredients, packaging, and all your other expenses. Another option that saves you startup costs is working from someone else's kitchen. That could be a restaurant that doesn't use their kitchen 24/7 and wants to make some extra money renting out the space to other food businesses, or it can be a shared commissary kitchen that's specifically set up for multiple users. Current rates for renting space in a commissary kitchen tend to be between $20 and $30 an hour, and it often depends on how much time you commit to on a regular basis. Rates tend to go down per hour as you use more hours or if you're consistent about your kitchen schedule rather than popping in from time to time. And those rates may or may not include storage space for your ingredients and for your finished products when you're not actively using the kitchen. You most likely run into some space constraints and time constraints if you're using a shared commissary kitchen. There may be other people using the same space at the same time, so you're limited to a specific station. You may be scrambling to finish and clean up by the end of the time you've booked. But shared kitchens tend to be plug and play, which is a big plus if you're launching a business with limited capital. When you look at a commercial kitchen space, first ask whether the space makes sense for what you want to make. If your product is heavy, is it easy to move stuff in and out? Does the layout work for what you're planning? If most of your work happens on the stovetop, it might not make sense to rent a space that's set up as a bakery with ovens being the main focus. Is this space set up for the permitting you need? Depending on what you're making and where you're selling it, you may need to be licensed by the county, the state, or even the federal government. If someone who is already working in the space is permitted by one of these agencies, that tells you that the space has what you need to get that permitting yourself. If it isn't already permitted for what you want, you may need to make expensive upgrades. Now, what kind of equipment does the space have? If the equipment isn't just right for your business, can you make it work without losing too much efficiency? If you plan to bring in equipment, is there enough space? And is there enough electrical capacity to run the equipment that you want to bring in? And how about the price? Can you afford the rent? If you can't afford it, is it likely you'll be able to afford it soon? Most businesses don't bring up in enough money right away to pay for all the operating costs, but every business should have a plan towards profitability. Just a trajectory that will set you up for your business to be self-sufficient before you run out of money. Now, how about the landlord? Do they seem like someone you can work with? Do they take your concerns seriously? And are there any other red flags that might make you not want to enter into a business relationship with them? When you're deciding whether a commercial kitchen space makes sense for you, also consider how many other tenants are using the space. Are there so many people working that everyone gets in each other's way? Hopefully you'll come tour the kitchen while there's work in progress, so you can get a sense of what it feels like to work there. Ask whether there's storage space available and whether you have to pay extra to use that storage. Is there space for you in the refrigerator and freezer if you need refrigerated or frozen storage? If there's no storage space, you have to make other arrangements for storing your products, and they may cost extra or require extra permitting. And finally, what kind of lease commitment does the landlord want? Does that make sense for you? It's highly unlikely that you'll find everything you want and need in a shared kitchen rental, but if you go into the conversation knowing what's most important to you, you're more likely to find a space that meets your most important needs. Now, if your business keeps growing, or if you have big plans and some capital right out of the gate, you may decide to build your own commercial kitchen. The cost will probably range from $25,000 to $150,000, which is a very wide range and depends on what you need and want. If you're launching a coffee shop or cafe, you'll most likely need to build out some kind of commercial kitchen no matter what. Now, setting up the infrastructure for installing equipment is usually the most expensive part of a kitchen build out. You may be able to pick up a 3 compartment sink for $1,000, but installing the plumbing to hook it up can easily cost 10 times that. If you find a space that's already been a commercial kitchen, you can usually save a ton of time and money by hooking up to existing infrastructure. Now, ventilation can be the most expensive part of a commercial kitchen build out, though you can save money there by finding a space in a one-story building. Ventilation systems need to vent a certain number of feet from neighboring businesses or a property line. So if your business is on the ground floor of a 6-story building, your ventilation system needs to go up all 6 stories and then over and away from the neighbors. It's not uncommon for that to cost as much as all your other build out expenses combined. But once your kitchen is built, it can be a game changer as far as your business operations and your quality of life. It gives you room to grow. You have access 24/7 without having to sign up or watch the clock. And you can set up the space for exactly how you want it for your specific processes and your specific products. The licensing and permitting that you need for a food business depends on what you're making and who you're selling it to. As we've seen with cottage kitchen permitting, health departments identify different categories and levels of risk, and those risk levels determine what you can do with any type of license or permit and which agency will be responsible for inspecting you. Health department permitting also depends on what sales channels you use to reach your customers. If you use multiple sales channels, you'll most likely be required to be permitted by multiple agencies. Direct retail is when there are no intermediaries between you and your customers, like at a farmer's market, a cafe or restaurant, a catering gig, direct home delivery, or online sales. That's generally permitted by the county. Although if you're taking orders online and shipping your products to another state, that gets trickier. County health permits tend to be quick but expensive. If you're getting a catering permit or building out a food truck or food cart, or building out a full kitchen, you need to submit a plan review application, which takes a few weeks or even a few months to process. If you're planning to sell your products wholesale, that is, through a middleman who then gets them to the final customer, you need to be permitted by your state's agriculture department. That application is long and confusing, but we're here to help. A State Department of Agriculture permit application can take a few weeks or a few months to process, and you really shouldn't start producing and selling until you've received your final approval and inspection. On the bright side, wholesale kitchen permits tend to be inexpensive, usually less than $100 for an entire year. The major downside of state permitting is that you can't produce anything with more than 3% meat if the meat is raw, or 2% meat if the meat is cooked. If you do want to prepare and sell a product with more meat than that, you need to work with the USDA and the FDA. They require you to complete and submit a HACCP plan, and that's an acronym for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. To create that plan, you go through every step in your process from purchasing to storage to production to shipping, and you identify any point where a food safety hazard can occur. Food safety hazards fall into 3 categories: biological, which includes bacteria and other pathogens; chemical, which includes cleaning fluids and also allergens; and physical, which includes rocks and stones or any kind of debris that can make its way into a food product. Once you identify those potential hazards, you also need to include information about how you will prevent or control them. A HACCP plan also takes quite a bit of formatting, and reviewers can be pretty strict about the formatting because formatting makes us safer. Once your HACCP plan is approved and your kitchen has gone through its initial USDA inspection, the agency inspects you every single day that you produce products that are under their purview. And you heard that right, every single day. On holidays, when their inspectors have days off, you either aren't allowed to produce these products or you need to pay extras so they can pay their inspectors overtime. As you're probably gathering, it's best to avoid products that are regulated by the USDA if you possibly can. And I'm not saying this to discourage anyone, but just to let you know what you're getting into. And just to be clear, you can make products with meat if you're selling them directly to consumers. You only have to use this level of regulation um, if you are wholesaling it, that is selling it through middlemen. When you're working with the health department, it's useful to keep in mind that the landscape is confusing, and most health inspectors understand this. Because there are multiple agencies permitting multiple types of food production, even health inspectors from one agency don't always know the nuances of permitting regulations from other agencies. In fact, if you ask a county health inspector about a state regulation or vice versa, they may tell you something that's even stricter than what you'd get from the permitting agency itself because the inspector's outside their comfort zone and they want to play it safe. So learn as much as you can about what's required, get the permits you think you need. Try not to get so stuck on understanding the permit requirements that you prevent yourself from launching. Health inspectors tend to be oriented much more towards education and enforcement unless you're doing something that's clearly dangerous, like showing up at an event without a hand washing station or with your food held at 100 degrees. You want to treat health inspectors as allies and as human beings. They don't want anybody to get sick, and neither do you. It's bad for business. If a health inspector seems to be playing a power game with you, one good strategy is to ask them for help. That allows them to keep their power, and it brings them over to your side. But I've heard people say, "Oh, why are you making me do this? This is so stupid." And if you say that to a health inspector, they're going to mess with you. They're human beings too. There are a variety of channels that you can use to get your food product to your customers. I've broken them out into three main buckets, but creative business owners are always figuring out new ways to sell. Direct retail is when you sell your products directly to your customers. That includes opening a cafe or restaurant, selling at a farmer's market, direct home delivery, catering, or online sales. Direct wholesale is when you sell to a store and your business does the work of getting that product to the store, either by doing deliveries or by shipping. Distributor wholesale is when you sell to a larger distribution company that aggregates products from many independent businesses and delivers them all at once to the stores that are their customers. When you sell food through direct retail, you get to keep all the money. The customer pays $8, you keep $8 minus your business expenses, of course. Now, direct retail is based on relationships. In most cases, you meet your customers face to face, and even when you don't, like with online sales, you still have a direct email relationship with them. Meeting your customers directly allows you to look them in the eye and tell your story, which is probably the most important marketing tool of all. When you meet your customers face to face, you get to introduce and test new product ideas without having to jump through the hoops of convincing retailers to put those products on their shelves. The main exception here is if you're selling at farmers markets, because market managers like to know when you're bringing in something new so they can make sure you aren't stepping on another vendor's toes. But they're usually pretty open to new things. They just want to be able to approve them. Now, nice packaging will help sell products in any sales channels, but you can get away with more inexpensive and homespun packaging when you're selling directly because you don't have to rely on packaging to tell your story. You're also there to tell it yourself, either in person or through your website. Direct sales also brings you immediate cash, which can be a game changer. With wholesale, you often have to wait a few weeks or even a few months to get paid, so you need extra working capital. With direct sales, you can even find ways to get paid in advance, like with online orders. The downside of direct sales is that fulfillment or getting your product to your customers can be time consuming and expensive. Think of the time you spend staffing a farmer's market booth, along with time for loading, unloading, setup, breakdown, washing dishes at the end of the day, or the time you spend packing online orders or doing direct home deliveries. Direct sales channels also tend to be difficult to scale because there's only so much of you. You can hire someone and staff multiple market booths at once, but most market businesses sell most when the owner is in the booth. Direct online sales are an exception here because if you have good systems, you should be able to scale them gracefully. Direct wholesale is when you sell your products through a third party, like a store, and you ship or deliver those products directly to that store. With direct wholesale, you take in less revenue per item than you do when you sell directly to customers. It's a good idea to create a pricing structure where customers pay more or less the same amount, whether they buy your products directly from you or from a retail store. If your product costs $8 at the farmer's market, you have to charge your wholesale accounts more like $5 per item, so they can add a markup of at least 50%. So it may feel like you're giving away a large percentage of your revenue, but it's actually a smaller percentage than you'd give away if you were selling through a distributor who delivers to retail stores, in which case you have to build two separate markups into your price. When you sell directly to retail stores, you get to deliver working relationships with the people who staff the stores and who are in a position where they can recommend your products to customers. Bring samples, be friendly, and be responsive to issues that come up. Don't just drop your product at the loading dock. Also, go check how it looks on the shelf from time to time. Are you happy with how it's displayed? Did they let their inventory run out before reordering? If you have concerns, you can address them right away, in person, politely, and patiently, of course. With direct wholesale sales, you reach customers in your immediate area. If your product uses flour that's milled in the Skagit Valley, that means something to someone in Washington State, but it probably doesn't mean anything to someone in Delaware. However, it takes time and energy to deliver to stores directly, and that's time and energy that you can be using making more product or marketing or doing bookkeeping. Weigh the delivery expense compared to the capacity it takes away from other business activities and decide whether it's worth it to you. Delivering directly to wholesale accounts can also limit your reach, at least compared to working with a distributor who may be able to take your products all over the country. If your product isn't place-based, it may be advantageous for you to work with a distributor rather than doing all the deliveries yourself. Retailers do sometimes see it as an inconvenience when you deliver to them directly. For bigger stores especially, it's a lot easier on their end to order product as part of a larger order from a distributor. In some cases, the fact that you only do direct deliveries can even be a deterrent for a retailer deciding to pick up your product line. Payment terms for direct retail can stress your cash flow because it typically takes about a month to get paid for wholesale orders. If your wholesale accounts tend to order weekly, you may even have to produce and deliver 3 or 4 rounds of product before you get paid for the first round. So you need to plan for that in your cash flow planning. When you sell through a distributor, you can potentially sell your products all over the country without doing any extra work, at least on the fulfillment end. You still have to do plenty of work on the marketing front, though. When you sell through a distributor, the fact that you don't have to do deliveries allows you to focus on production and achieve economies of scale. If production and manufacturing are your strengths, or if you can develop a successful relationship with a co-manufacturer who produces your product for you, then distributor wholesale may be your best option. When you develop distributor wholesale channels, you have the opportunity to build a business that will attract an investor or a buyer, if that's the route you want to take. But to attract a buyer or investor, your business will need to be profitable, or at least have clear potential to be profitable. Costing structures for distributor wholesale earn you even less revenue per item than direct wholesale. For an item that you sell directly to customers for $8, you may only be able to charge $4. Both the distributor and the final retailer will add their markups to your $4, making the final price the same $8 that you charge when you sell directly. It's difficult to build relationships with distributor wholesale sales. You don't meet the retailers who sell your products face to face, so they may not care as much about your success. You'll probably have to hire a broker and run promotional sales, so you end up earning even less per item. Ideally, you make up for this with volume, but it doesn't always happen. All of these expenses and markups affect your cash flow. Like with direct wholesale sales, it usually takes an average of a month to get paid for an order, and that stresses your cash flow on an even larger scale because you'll be fulfilling bigger orders and waiting for larger sums of money. Some general takeaways about different sales channels. Your revenue per item decreases with every middleman who handles your products. That may be worth it to you if you're able to achieve sufficient volume, or it may not. Weigh the variables, make the best choice you can. Don't automatically accept big opportunities because you're excited that someone wants to carry your products. Keep your eyes open about what you're getting into. When you handle your own products, like doing your own deliveries or selling directly at a farmer's market, you earn more money per item, but you have to do more work to make those sales happen. And the more layers there are between you and your customers, the harder you need to work on your marketing. Instead of being able to look your customers in the eye and tell your story, your packaging will have to do a lot of the heavy lifting in telling your story. Make sure it's eye-catching and communicates who you are and what matters to you. Certifications like organic, fair trade, non-GMO, minority owned, or women owned become especially important when your packaging is telling your story for you. And finally, it takes a lot of money to scale up a food production business. Between the working capital you need to keep producing until you get paid and the equipment you need to scale up, it can really add up. So know what you're getting into and make sure you're prepared. Preparing food for a business has some things in common with the way you cook at home. You'll be making familiar recipes and trying to make them as tasty as possible. But the balance you strike between what it costs and how much care you put into it is going to be a little different from making stuff at home. Of course, cost is important when you're feeding your loved ones. Care is important when you're feeding your customers, but the equation changes as you develop systems and work towards creating a viable business model. When you use a special ingredient like vanilla beans in a product or a menu item you're developing for your business, experiment with your recipes to keep your costs down whenever possible, but don't lose sight of quality. If you use a little less of an expensive ingredient, will the difference be noticeable? If the difference is noticeable, will the product still be special? Naturally, you want to develop products that are wonderful and keep your customers coming back for more, but where do you draw the line? There are no hard and fast answers here, but it's important to ask the questions and experiment with variables. Food often behaves differently when you prepare it in larger batches, so it's important to experiment with different quantities to find the batch size that's most efficient. For example, if you're cooking pasta, then mixing it with other ingredients and packing it into containers, you don't want to cook all your pasta at once because it gets gummy and hard to work with while it sits. It's better to cook reasonably sized batches and then handle them as soon as possible after they cook. Or if you're cooking a large batch of potatoes, you probably wouldn't be able to cook them hot and fast like you would at home unless you have special equipment. You probably need to work with smaller batches or switch to a different cooking method like pan frying or braising. And I'm not telling you this to teach you how to cook pasta or potatoes in large quantities. I'm just using these examples to illustrate the point that whatever you're cooking, you probably need to adapt your processes and maybe even your recipes when you start making it in larger batches. Packaging serves a functional purpose, and it's also a valuable marketing tool. Your package defines the size of your product. You may choose a 6-ounce jar or a 12-ounce jar. Either way, the shape and size of the jar gives you some guardrails for how much to pack, though you should also weigh and measure, of course. Packaging also keeps your product fresh. Some packaging materials do that better than others. Think about the difference between popcorn packed in plastic versus popcorn packed in paper, especially if you're not planning to eat that popcorn for a few days. When packaging food product, with packaging, with packaged food products, packaging and labeling also gives vital and often required information about the contents of the package, like the net weight, ingredients, allergen information, and producer contact info. Most packages nowadays also have nutritional panel, which actually isn't required by any government agency unless you sell at least 100,000 units annually of a single type of product, like a single flavor of hot sauce. The reason even very small businesses often put nutritional info on their labels is that customers appreciate seeing it there. Packaging is also a very important marketing tool. Everything about your package design, from your font to your colors to the tagline you use to describe your product, communicates to your customers about who you are and why your products and your business should matter to them. So here's some things to think about when you're choosing packaging. Is it sturdy enough to stand up to the handling it's going to receive? Will customers be rummaging through packages? Will you be selling products outdoors, like at a farmer's market? If your product is meant to be kept refrigerated or frozen, can the package hold up to these temperatures? For example, if you put a sticker on a frozen product, it has to have adhesive designed for very cold temperatures or it'll fall off. Also, if you're making something fragile like chips, try to find a material that will protect the contents well. Think about how your packaging will fit on a retail shelf. One California grocer discontinued a snack food that was otherwise a great product because the bag was too big for the shelf. They ended up putting it on a higher shelf meant for backstock, and nobody bought it because nobody could see it. For better or for worse, cost is another factor that comes into play when you're choosing packaging. Some materials, like glass, are ideal in many ways except for price. It's not uncommon for packaging to cost as much as the food that goes into it, especially if the packaging is custom printed in relatively small quantities. Now, sustainable packaging matters. Customers want it, and it's the right thing to do. But it can come with a whole new set of considerations and problems. Compostable, plastic-like materials tend to only have a shelf life of about 9 months. So if you buy in bulk to lower your price per unit, you may end up throwing away or composting hundreds or thousands of bags if you can't use them in time. So look at all the variables you can and make the best choices you can. In states with sales tax, like Washington State, you generally pay a sales tax on anything where you are the final user and anything that you won't resell. In some states like Washington, you don't pay sales tax on food. So if you make a packaged food product in Washington State, you also need to prove to your packaging suppliers that you're a reseller and that you use that packaging as part of your product that you sell to an end consumer. You prove this by giving them a copy of your reseller certificate, which is automatically issued when you apply for a state business license. You don't need to apply for the reseller's license separately. It comes standard with the license. If you need a copy of your reseller certificate or your current certificate has expired, you can get a copy by accessing the Department of Revenue's website through Secure Access Washington, or SAW, which is the central platform that all business tax agencies use in the state. One way to remember what types of products are subject to sales tax when you buy them for a business and which products aren't is to think of a price gun that you use to stamp dates on products. You pay tax on the price gun because you keep it and use it for your business, but you don't pay sales tax on the pricing tape because the labels that you stamp on your products become part of the final final product that you sell to your customers. Going to move on to costing, which is the process of figuring out how much it costs to make your product and how much it makes sense to charge. Decisions around costing are some of the most important choices you make as a business owner, and they affect every unit you sell. If your prices comfortably cover your costs, then you make money each time you sell something. But if you're not charging enough to cover the basic expense, you may even end up losing money each time you sell something. This will be especially important as your business grows. It's natural to think that the way to earn more money is to sell more product, but you can often get even more mileage as far as profitability if you tighten up your purchasing or just design a product with sufficient margins right out of the gate. COGS is an acronym for cost of goods sold, which captures all of the expenses that go into producing the physical product that you sell to your customers. In a nutshell, that includes materials such as ingredients and packaging, and the time you spend producing the product. It doesn't include the time you spend doing all the other things necessary to run your business, like purchasing and payroll and staffing a farmer's market booth or doing deliveries. The other kinds of costs you incur in running your business are called indirect or fixed costs, and they include rent, utilities, business licenses, software. These mostly stay the same as you scale up your business. If you pay $1,000 a month rent and you sell one item, then your rent cost per item is $1,000. But if you pay the same $1,000 a month in rent and you sell 10,000 items, then your rent cost per item is 10 cents. And I'm focusing on COGS or variable costs here because it's where you have the most leverage when you make changes. If you can lower your cost of materials or production labor, that's a gift that keeps on giving. The more you produce, the more you save. To calculate production labor costs, multiply the number of hours it takes to make a batch of a product by the pay rate per hour. This can be minimum wage or it can be more. If it takes you 4 hours to make a batch and you pay $20 an hour, then your labor cost for the batch is $80. If there are 80 sellable units in a batch, then the labor cost per unit is $1. Also include your own labor time, even if you're not yet paying yourself. If you're not sure how much to pay yourself, or how much to figure in for paying yourself, just include a pay rate for paying someone else to do the same work. By including these labor costs, even if you're not paying yourself, you end up with a business model where you're able to pay yourself down the line. You also set up a revenue structure that has money built in to pay employees once you're ready to not do all the work yourself. Also, include the time you spend setting up and cleaning up because those processes take time and cost money too. So here's some general considerations about COGS or cost of goods sold and pricing. Your COGS should ideally make up no more than 50% of your revenue, although there are a ton of caveats here. If you're selling directly to consumers like at a farmer's market, it's better to aim for COGS of no more than 40% because you have plenty of extra expenses like staffing the booth and paying booth fees. If you sell through a distributor, it may be okay for your COGS to be as high as 60%, especially if the distributor picks up the product from your kitchen and you don't have any delivery or fulfillment expense. However, if you sell wholesale, especially through a distributor, you incur costs for sales promotions. So it's still good to keep your COGS as low as you can, as long as you can charge a final price that customers are willing and able to pay. Also keep in mind that the more middlemen handle your product, the lower your revenue and the higher of your COGS percentage per item. The same jar of salsa may earn you $8 with a 30% COGS if you sell that at a farmer's market, but it will net you closer to $4 with a 60% COGS if you sell it to a distributor. Recipe costing is the foundation for calculating cost of goods sold. Figure out how much the ingredients cost to make a batch of your product, then divide it by the number of units in a batch to get the ingredients cost per unit. Also include the packaging costs for the number of units in the batch. Don't just set and forget your pricing. Ingredients prices change, and you want to make sure you're taking this into account and making adjustments if necessary. And you want to keep an eye on your food costs both before and after the fact. You might do the math and see that the cost of ingredients makes up 20% of the revenue earned from your product. But then when you look at your books, you see you've actually spent 30%. There are a number of reasons why this might happen. Now, there may be more waste than you realize. It costs the same amount to make a batch of product, whether you sell it all or throw half of it in the compost. That can hit your bottom line especially hard if you make and sell perishable food with a short shelf life. You may also spend more than you expect on COGS if ingredients and packaging prices have increased and you haven't noticed or you haven't updated your pricing. One solution is to keep a spreadsheet where you list your key ingredients and enter current prices quarterly or even annually. Your portion prices can also affect your cost of goods sold. If you base your price on a 6-ounce serving, but you and your employees are actually handing out 8-ounce servings, then your COGS can end up as much as 30% higher than you expect. You can play with variables when you do recipe costing. What will the COGS percentage look like if you use less meat and more beans? How about smaller portion sizings? Having this information allows you to develop recipes and cost structures that set you up for profitability and peace of mind. Now, whatever you make, at whatever scale you make it, you need to have some sort of bookkeeping system that gives you real-time feedback about how much you're spending and earning. Even if you're not a numbers person, you need to make friends with the numbers. You may even find yourself becoming a numbers person because understanding your numbers and using that information to make changes will make your life less stressful and save you from running out of money. Even if you hire someone to do your bookkeeping and accounting, you still need to make friends with your numbers. Learn to read and glean financial information from your financial statements, whether or not you create those statements yourself. You can use a bookkeeping program or you can work with spreadsheets. QuickBooks is robust and you can generate all kinds of cool reports. Wave is somewhat less robust, but it's free and it's enough for any startup business. Bookkeeping is about categorizing, so you could also easily get started with spreadsheet. If nothing else, save your receipts and records and keep them all in one place. Finance people disparagingly call this shoebox accounting, but it's 1,000 times better than no accounting at all. If you have all your records, you'll always be able to catch up. It may be tedious, and you may lose the opportunity to address issues right away, but it's something. Financial accounting is what you do to satisfy tax agencies and lenders. It focuses on three main financial statements: profit and loss, balance sheet, and cash flow statement. Management accounting can use financial accounting, but it goes deeper and it's a way for you to ask more nuanced questions about what's going on in your business. Looking at your ingredients and labor costs as percentages is a form of management accounting. The IRS couldn't care less about the details of your production labor percentage, but it's information that can make or break your business. Think about numbers that capture different kinds of successes. What's the retail value of food you produce in a day, and how many labor hours does it take to produce it? How do your direct retail sales compare with direct wholesale and distributor wholesale sales? You can ask these questions and capture this information any way you want and any way that makes sense to you. Now, branding is the process of defining and communicating your company's identity. It's a foundational part of your business, one that affects everything from the way you interact with your community to the types of vehicles you drive. It's worthwhile to think about branding at the very beginning of your food business journey. The insights you get from understanding and framing who you are as a business provides a North Star that can help guide you when making all kinds of big and small decisions about how you operate. Branding matters because it differentiates your business from other businesses operating in a similar space. Knowing who you are and what matters to you as a business also helps your customers to recognize you and understand why they should support you and buy your products. A well-crafted brand identity will resonate with your customers, resonate with the customers you most want to reach, the customers who will buy over and over and sing your praises on social media. If you have a solid brand identity, you'll be able to work it into every aspect of your business. This farmers market organization logo expresses their brand with both words and visuals. The produce graphics are colorful and they signal abundance. The font is blocky, accessible, and straightforward, and the text captures the main pillars of the organization: the product, the customer base, and the deep ties to local agriculture. Packaging can express your brand by being playful or sleek or environmentally sustainable. Your social media voice can capture your brand by being conversational or snarky or informational. Even the decision to focus on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok will say something about who you are and what drives you. You can even choose to do very little social media or none at all, and that choice can be expression of your brand. Your choice of sales channels can also be a branding decision. If you sell a high-end product, you may choose to sell at fancy food shows. And if your business brand emphasizes getting to know your customers personally, you're more likely to choose direct sales channels. Do you want your signs to be big and colorful or spare and elegant? Do you want to display signs everywhere or keep things minimal with just a couple of strategically located signs? It all ties into branding. Your emails also express your branding, both with their tone, which should be consistent with the tone of your social media voice, and with their frequency and their content. We tend to think of marketing as the intentional activities that we do to familiarize people with our businesses and get them to buy our products, either immediately or down the line. But marketing actually encompasses everything you do day to day that gives customers reasons to try your products and services and keep them coming back for more. Dedicated marketing activities include how you display your products and how your signage looks, how your signage points people to what they want and communicates to customers about your product's benefits and features. Promotional pricing or temporary price reductions can entice customers to try products. The lowered price is an incentive, and promotional pricing usually comes with signage that calls attention to the product. Social media is, of course, a powerful marketing tool. You can use it to let people know about exciting developments like new products, and regular posting can be useful just to remind your customers that you exist. Paid advertising used to be the main way that businesses reach their customers. Smaller businesses use it a lot less now that they can leverage free social media, but paid advertising can still make sense sometimes, especially if you're broadcasting exactly the right message in exactly the right channel. Be sure to measure your results and be clear about what you're trying to achieve when you run an ad. Daily activities that support your intentional marketing include product design, such as recipes, package size, and package design. If your products or services meet people's needs, they're more likely to come back for more. Customer service is also an invaluable marketing tool. Customers who feel like you care about their needs are more likely to continue supporting your business than customers who feel brushed off or patronized. In fact, if your business makes a mistake and you deal with it gracefully, you may have a better chance of keeping a lifelong customer than if you'd never made the mistake in the first place. People often frame discussions of marketing in terms of 5 Ps. The product is what you're actually selling. The marketing side of the product is how it meets people's needs and gives them reason to buy again. Price is a powerful marketing tool as well. A price should send a message. Is the product of good value? Is it similar to other products in its category, but a little bit better? Or is it an entirely different eating experience from products with the same name, like soy sauce or pickles? Don't ever try to compete on the basis of price alone by lowering your price so your product is cheaper than any of your competitors. First of all, that may send the wrong message about its quality. Secondly, small businesses can never win at that game because larger businesses can always lower their prices even more than you can. Also, if you lower the prices to the point where you're not taking in enough revenue to meet your expenses, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. Promotion is when you do things to call attention to your business and your product. Advertising and social media are promotion strategies, and so are signage and temporary price reductions. Place-based marketing is about being in the right place at the right time. Many of us have Pavlovian associations of popcorn and movies. Selling popcorn in a movie theater is an example of using place effectively in your marketing. And finally, the people you have representing your company can be an important part of your marketing strategy. If you treat employees well, they're more likely to represent your business well to your customers, who can tell when an employee is disengaged. Make sure to also train your employees well in customer service protocol, things like how to respond to a complaint and follow up and make things right. Give them discretion to go the extra mile, and it will pay off in the end. Demographics are ways of grouping and identifying people based on measurable traits like age, income level, or number of children. Psychographics are ways of categorizing based on personal values and choices. If you're marketing to children of South and Central American immigrants looking for healthy versions of traditional foods, the immigration status of their parents is a demographic, while the interest in healthy foods is a psychographic. Um, and I love this example. It's actually a real example from someone who I was in a cohort class with who was making an agua fresca mix that was sweetened with agave. Yeah, so the immigration status of the parents is demographic. The interest in healthy foods is a psychographic. When you're crafting a marketing message, think about both demographics and psychographics of the people you want to reach. Find language, references, and media that most effectively reaches these customers. Packaging is another critical marketing tool for food brands. Your package design should appeal to the specific customers you want to reach by being playful or classy or rooted in a particular culture. Certifications such as organic or fair trade or women owned or minority owned are another way to use your packaging to reach the right customers. These certification logos are especially important when you're selling wholesale because you won't be there in person to communicate directly with customers about your values and your practices. Also, don't underestimate the importance of functionality as a marketing tool. If you tear open a bag that's supposed to be reclosable and it rips and the product spills on the floor and you can't reclose the bag, that's going to create a negative association with the product, and customers may not want to buy it again. And finally, let's talk about safety, food safety, which is essential to the survival of any food business. Of course, you need to know about the obvious basics, the things that you need to know to pass the food handler's test and get your food handler's cards, which are keep your food in safe ranges, in and out of the danger zone on both the hot and the cold ends. Wash your hands early and often. Sanitize surfaces before and after you use them and between tasks, especially when you handle high-risk foods like raw chicken and raw eggs. Use tongs, gloves, single-use paper to avoid having bare hand contact with ready-to-eat foods. And have some kind of program in place for pest control, ideally with an outside company that can provide these services in a timely and professional way. But food safety takes more than just following a list of rules. It requires a mindset where you proactively look for problems and solve them and create protocols that prevent issues from happening in the first place. Make safety a priority and make sure that everyone who handles the food you serve knows that it's a priority. Work food safety into your systems and your training. It should be an integral part of your processes, and your employees should understand the why as well as the what. Many of the food safety systems you implement require paying close attention to detail and being as present as possible overall. When you're present, you notice things when things aren't as clean or as they should be, or as hot or as cold as they should be. Paying this kind of attention to detail slows you down. So your success also depends on finding the right level of attention to detail where you keep things clean and safe, but you also don't go so far down that rabbit hole that you don't get anything done. And finally, as a business owner, you be in a leadership role. People pay attention to what you do, not just to what you say. So set an example, be humble, and always keep learning. If something goes wrong with your food safety protocols, and sometimes even when you do everything right, you may need to recall some product that you sold. To set yourself up for this kind of possibility, your product should have labels or lot numbers that say what batch they're from. If you only make one batch per day, a date stamp saying when the product was made or even when it will expire is one way to identify batches. If you label by batches as well as dates, you can make a recall narrower if it happens. Instead of having to recall everything from a particular day, you might only have to recall everything from a specific batch, depending on what the issue is. And it's best to err on the side of caution and recall any product you suspect may be questionable. That may seem more expensive in the short term because there will be product that you can't sell, but it can be less expensive in the long term if you really catch any product that may be a problem rather than leaving it out in the world where people can still buy it. Okay. Um, so I'm gonna stop the screen share and we can move on to questions. Oh, absolutely. Economy of scale is that it generally gets more efficient. It takes less time per item as you make more items. And, one way that can happen is set up and clean up. So you have to set up and clean up whether you're making 10 items or 100 items. Um, so then the setup and cleaning time, when you divide it over the number of items that you make, gets to be considerably less when you're producing in larger batches. Um, you know, business owners do a lot of informal coaching. Like for as long as I've been doing this, um, people have been asking, if they could just sit down and pick my brains about it. And I know a lot of other small business owners have the same experience. And actually, in 2013, my business, Patty Pan, became a worker-owned cooperative. And at that point, I became less needed in the day-to-day. So I started looking around for a job and I discovered Business Impact, which is a really good fit. And I really enjoyed the coaching work. Yeah, I like supporting people. I like using, the weird idiosyncratic knowledge that I have. Ooh. Yeah, like I could talk for a long time about that, but I'll try to keep it brief. Um, when we converted to a worker co-op, um, we didn't know anything about all the resources are out there for converting businesses and training people to think like owners and just be more engaged with the whole process of owning and running the business. And so we kind of, we figured out how to do it. We drafted and agreed on some bylaws. We did the legal work, and then we just kind of dove in. And so I say for the first couple of years, we weren't really functioning as a co-op. Uh, but then once we started learning more, we started taking advantage of a lot of those resources and um, just the responsibility for running the business has become a lot more widely shared and it's just been a wonderful collaboration. Um, one of our member owners and I both enrolled in a co-op management program called through Pinchot University, which formerly Bainbridge Graduate Institute, which I think the program is not around anymore, but us being in there and learning together was really profound. The U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops has some really good resources. Um, the Northwest Co-op Development Center does a lot as well. Yeah, and if anybody's interested in launching a co-op or converting to a co-op, that's one of the things I work on as a business coach as well. Um, I guess my best advice would be make sure it's financially viable. I think donations give you more stability than grants because grants can be hit or miss, while donations, um, you can appeal directly to people. But also, if you have some way to produce revenue through what you do, that's great. And I know this is, we're talking about nonprofit and social enterprise, but I also think of the financial part as the foundation that you have to do what you care about and what you love and keep doing it. Um, the hard truth is there are very few grants for startup business owners in any industry, and in the food industry, it is especially tricky because it's can be so expensive to build out a space. I recommend starting with something that takes much less capital than building out a restaurant, like a farmer's market booth. And then building it from there. And then once you do that, you build your customer base, you and you get a track record that you can use when you're applying for a loan. You can apply for business loans. Business Impact gives business loans, And we also provide a lot of support around getting ready for those business loans. Um, but the business also has to be, um, it has to have the financial foundation to pay back the loan. And, our criteria are, as far as collateral and credit score, can be more relaxed than what you see from traditional lenders. But in a way, like, to make that work, we have to be really diligent as far as the business fundamentals. And that's why we also provide the support around those fundamentals. Maybe cottage kitchen. You're already doing it. Okay. Yeah, and then with cottage kitchen, with farm products, probably dehydrating, baked goods that can include your own stuff. Where are you? Okay. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you play the long game. You look for the easiest point of entry. You keep doing that and build on it until you can do something that's a little more of a struggle. Yeah. Um, Humility. Um, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the term servant leadership. I think the most important job of a leader is to build the skills of the people they work with. So I think, understanding what people's strengths are, what people's potential is, being able to call on the right person for the right task, understand what tasks lend themselves well to delegation and which don't. Um, you know, when I've been in the role of managing a food business, I always found that, like, washing dishes was often the best place for me because, first of all, it sends the message that nobody's above washing dishes. But second of all, it allows you to kind of be a fly on the wall and observe how everything's working without being too intrusive. There are some management books I want to recommend from Zingerman's, which is a legendary deli in Ann Arbor, Michigan. One of the owners' name is Ari Weinswag, and he wrote a series of books called The Lapsed Anarchist's Guide to Managing a Business. And there's just great tools, great information in there about just this kind of holistic management.
Put a link in the chat for that one.
Yeah. Uh,
Great. I think let's go ahead and we'll end there. Devra, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I'm going to give the audience a moment to either send thanks in the chats or with emojis. Lots of good information. There are lots of on the ground information that is appropriate for food industry, but also just businesses in general. So thank you so much for your time and your wisdom.
yeah, it's been a pleasure to present to you and answer your questions. And Paige will send out my contact info and feel free to reach out for any specific questions.